Hello everyone, I'm back with another video for you today. I just reached Infinite rank after grinding many hours in Marvel Snap, so I wanted to bring you a meta snapshot, my experience, my time on the ladder, the decks that I faced, what I think are the strongest ones, and what you might encounter when you're playing yourself in Marvel Snap. So let's jump right into the first deck that I have here for you, which I think is the best at the moment. It's an S tier deck, in my opinion. It is SHURI. Now, some people will run SHURI without SAURON. SAURON is a relatively new card, which removes the ongoing effects of your cards, getting rid of some of those negative, Red Skull, Typhoid Mary type abilities. You can definitely play this deck without SAURON and without Typhoid Mary. And certainly I know many people do that. I don't know what you would replace really, just find some cards, maybe throw a Cosmo in there, I don't know. Some kind of 3-cost card, Maximus would probably do fine, something like that. But this is sort of the standard shell. You've got so many points with that SHURI play into something like the Red Skull is usually going to be the play. Other times, Typhoid Mary if you're missing another option. Some people even running She-Hulk as well. In this style of deck, you can go, She-Hulk with double strength, perhaps with Taskmaster at the end of the game if you skip on turn 5. So that's another variation of SHURI that you can do. But usually you're going to see that Red Skull into Taskmaster or Zola on the Red Skull at the end of the game. And it's very hard to play around because you have to figure out, do I try to play around Arnim Zola? Do I try to play around Taskmaster? They've also potentially got Ebony Maw coming down at the end of the game with the Taskmaster. Some people even run Titania as a 1-cost that you can use with the Taskmaster at the end. So, and then they've even got Aero. If you're, behind in points, they can always just slam the Aero and really ruin your day. So SHURI is very difficult to deal with. You kind of need a Shang-Chi, but even then, they have armor in the deck to protect their very big unit from your Shang-Chi. And quite often you'll have priority. You'll be winning the other 2 lanes. They'll put their big guy in one lane with the armor, and then they're just simply going to, play that Taskmaster at the end and really get you for 8 cubes quite often. So SHURI is very strong. I think decks need to have a way to deal with it this season in order to do well, because I think this is going to be one of the top contenders, if not the best. I think it just is the best at the moment deck that you can play. I will also throw this deck in the S tier. Even though it's not popular just yet, I have a feeling it might become more popular. I know some streamers are playing it. It's a deck that I actually built, and this is the deck that I climbed to Infinite with. So just keep in mind, this isn't popular just yet. But yeah, I think it's possible it will be, because I think it's a very strong deck. It basically can answer the SHURI deck very effectively, because you have Shang-Chi and Aero. So you can Aero their big unit away from the armor. You can then Shang-Chi them and win the game a lot of the time. And the deck just has answers to a lot of stuff with this Cosmo Killmonger package. You've got Colleen on Swarm and Vulture with Iron Fist and Miles Morales for some just really nice packages of cards which give insane amounts of pure value. So yeah, I think this deck's really well equipped to deal with a lot of the other strong decks. You beat, we'll get to a lot of the other decks later on, but you beat Galactus, Thanos quite consistently with these cards. You have a chance against all sorts of things with that Cosmo shutting down on reveals. So I think this deck's really solid. It might just become a lot more popular as the season goes on. So I'm throwing it in here. I'll have a video on the channel in the coming days about this deck and how I climbed to Infinite with it. But yeah, let's jump into the A tier decks now, shall we? So next on the tier list, we go into A tier, and here I have put Mr. Negative WONG. Now this is a deck that has become even stronger with the recent nerf to ZABU. ZABU can now get you that Mr. Negative on turn 3, reducing his cost. So that improves this deck greatly. You can then just play that Mr. Negative early, in theory, and then get a few turns of value with it. Draw some cards, maybe get an Iron Man for 0 with 5 strength, which is insanely broken. You can drop that WONG at the end of the game. You can Mystique the WONG for double WONG. You can go Silver Surfer on Brood as an option. You can do White Tiger stuff. This deck is really nasty. You're sometimes running Magic instead of Serra. That's like a personal preference, I think. Magic can be good, but Serra with those 3 drops is quite nice. So I think in this deck Serra's a bit better. But yeah, this deck is so nasty that you obviously are just retreating if you don't draw Mr. Negative. And if you are, then you're going crazy. With very unpredictable amounts of points, and just going to be an 8-cube powerhouse a lot of games. So Mr. Negative I think is very decent with this ZABU change. sort of became quite a bit scarier, having another way to get turn 3 Mr. Negative. Now you have Psylocke and ZABU to do that. Consider running Bast in this deck as well. That's a card you can include if you have it, if you desire. The next A tier deck is Thanos LOCKJAW. This is a deck that I've ran into quite a lot on my climb to Infinite rank. Some of the top players are running this deck, as far as I'm aware, and it's just, it looks very strange. The idea is you have those Infinity Stones, you know, shuffled into the deck with Thanos. You're then going to be able to use them with LOCKJAW to pull out very powerful units in one location. And you can even move units around with the Space Stone, which is very, very strong. So you're able to chain this LOCKJAW multiple times. You're able to blue Marvel and buff your guys up, maybe leech the opponent. Yeah, maybe even Dr. Octopus them. Quite a lot of Thanos decks are running Dr. Octopus. And if all of that fails, well, you're just going to have these big, you're going to have big chunky guys. You're going to win another location, ideally, with your low-cost stones, with Quinjet discounting them. And then you can aero the opponent, perhaps, if you're already winning. So this deck can be really nasty. I think its main weakness is you have to draw that LOCKJAW. And, you know, with all those Infinity Stones in your deck, it can be a bit unlikely that you draw it. So I think this deck's main weakness is its consistency, similarly to the Mr. Negative deck that I just showed. But when you do draw your cards, these decks are just absolute powerhouses and really, really difficult to shut down. So that's why they're A tier decks for me. Another deck that I think is probably worthy of A tier, perhaps B tier, is SHURI She-Hulk INFINAUT. The idea being you can skip on turn 6 after you've played Magic, and after you've played Moon Girl, potentially on turn 4, or SHURI on turn 4. You can skip that turn 6 and play a double She-Hulk INFINAUT final turn. And then there are some versions of this that don't run Taskmaster SHURI, some versions that do, some versions that run Ant-Man and more early game, different early game like Scorpion and stuff. But this is a pretty powerful deck for that surprise factor, especially if people don't know what you're running. You can just skip turn 6 and slam that incredible wombo combo of She-Hulks and Infinauts, and it's just very overpowering. So I think this is probably worthy of A tier. Another deck that I think is quite popular at the moment in the meta and quite strong is sort of an M.O.D.O.K value deck. So the idea here is to play the Collector with a lot of discard cards. You play Morbius, you Mystique your Morbius to have double Morbius going on, and then you're using that M.D.O.K on Helicarrier, on Apocalypse, on Swarm to fill your hand up with a bunch of cards, get a ton of value on Collector and your Morbiuses, and then you're going to have Dracula on the board as well to eat up the you know, the targets from the Helicarrier from the Apocalypse at the end of the game. So I wasn't sure whether to put this in A tier because it might very well be a B tier deck. I haven't really seen enough of it or played with it enough to know if it's actually an A tier deck, but it was giving me some problems. I think this deck has a lot of points. You need to have an answer for those Morbiuses really to properly shut it down, because of course Dracula, you can't really interact with that unless you maybe play a Maximus somehow at the end of the game. I don't know, it usually won't work because they just discard their cards. So yeah, you kind of need an Enchantress or something, or a Shang-Chi well-timed to beat this deck, I think, a lot of the time, when they draw their combo. So it's another sort of, I guess, fairly inconsistent deck, this discard kind of combo that you can pull off with M.O.D.O.K. And yeah, I think it's probably worthy of A tier, but it might be a B tier deck. Let's jump into the B tier decks now, shall we? The first deck that I've got in B tier is new ZABU DARKHAWK. So DARKHAWK's still a very decent card. You can play it with the rocks, the rock generators, Black Widow, etc. You kind of have to adapt a little bit though, because now we cannot just be playing all the 4 costs. We can't really do Spider-Man stuff because you can't play double Spider-Man, so kind of makes it a bit pointless. So instead, the idea is to go for Devil Dinosaur to fill your hand up with Moon Girl, perhaps get double Darkhawk so you can play that on turn 6 with the ZABU. Alternatively, have Darkhawk Mystique or Devil Dinosaur Mystique. There's a lot of pretty powerful combos here, and honestly this deck might be deserving of A tier. I haven't, again, played it myself, and I've not played against it too much, so and when I have played against it, I've beaten it fairly easily because I've been running cards that are good into the tool units and stuff. So a little bit hard to say if this is a B-worthy deck or an A-worthy deck, but it's definitely a strong contender. You've even got Aero as well to seal the deal. I'm not sure if everyone's running Aero in this style of deck, but that's something you can do. The Quinjet, Sentinel, I mean, it's just really strong, and then Darkhawk works quite well in a Devil Dinosaur deck because of that Moon Girl Mystique synergy. that you have going on. So powerful deck here, let's go to the next. I wasn't joking when I said that Mr. Negative's pretty strong this patch. I've got another Mr. Negative deck. It's a slightly different style, so this version is running no Silver Surfer, and it's more focused on just flipping the, flipping the cost and the strength, and then just drawing as many cards as possible with Adam Warlock. And you've got Rogue there for a bit of, counterplay for what the opponent's doing. Magic. Yeah, I mean, this deck's decent. You can even do Jane Foster with Mr. Negative. Again, just a different style. Perhaps if you don't have Silver Surfer, this is a negative deck that you could play. Pretty decent. I think slightly weaker than the Wong version because you don't have as explosive of a finisher compared to Wong. So yeah, probably worthy of B tier. The next B tier deck I have is Galactus. Now I wasn't sure whether to put this even lower actually than B tier. I just feel like Galactus is quite predictable at this point and there's quite a bit of counterplay available. Now, to be fair, a lot of decks in the meta don't really have great counterplay, I feel like, to Galactus, which is why I put it in B tier. But of course, the idea with this deck is to play Electro and Wave, and even Psylocke, and try to ramp out the Galactus, or perhaps just play a Hobgoblin, a Dr. Octopus. Just make life difficult for the opponent when that Galactus is going to come down, and you're going to be able to play Death and Knull. Now, obviously, this deck has a ton of Series 5 cards. Well, that's 2 Series 5 cards. And it's pretty difficult to assemble, so... but I think a fair amount of people do play Galactus on the ladder. I've played against it a lot on my climb to Infinite. But I wouldn't say... Yeah, I mean, I think it's a B tier deck. I think that's fair. There are other versions of Galactus. You can play Shuri into Hobgoblin for a turn 6 Galactus build, which is something that's fairly popular. I don't like that personally. I think this version's a bit more probably consistent than relying on Shuri Hobgoblin, but, do whatever you feel like when it comes to Galactus. It's a good 2-cube gainer deck, but I'm not sure it's good for much more than that. And I find that often as Galactus, you probably just end up getting Aeroed or Cosmoed and end up giving away cubes, but feel free to play Galactus if it's your kind of thing. I think it's maybe worthy of the B tier. So now we are entering the C tier. These are decent decks, which, they've been around for a while, I think, and they're pretty okay, although they're not really using the current sort of super OP stuff. So the first one we have here is Patriot. You know what Patriot does. Cards with no abilities, buff them up with, Patriot, Mystique the Patriot, Blue Marvel, Khazar, Ultron. It's got some good stuff. It's a decent deck. You can definitely win with it. But yeah, I think against stuff like Shuri, for example, you're just going to get overwhelmed, really. These decks that are at the top of the tier list for me here, the top of the meta snapshot, I think, are just not really comparable. Like, when they get their draws, when they combo, they have a way higher point ceiling than things like the Patriot, some of these other C-tier decks. But that's not to say you can't win with this. You definitely can, but it is a fairly common deck in the meta compared to, yeah, I mean, it just is fairly common. So let's go to the next C-tier deck. You're probably starting to see a theme here. We've got Death Wave. This is a deck that's existed for a while as well. I put it in C-tier. I think it's become a little bit better recently because you have Wolverine receiving a buff. So that's actually quite a nice card in this deck now. You can get that +2 strength, maybe even +4 strength with Wolverine, which is pretty cool. You also have Wave, which is quite a good card against Mr. Negative decks because you can disrupt their final turn with Wave. So there's some counterplay to that here. I think you are still going to get probably... I mean, you can win with Arrow, She-Hulk, and things like this off of that Wave. There's definitely some good potential for Death Wave to win games. But yeah, I'd put it in C-tier because I think it's, again, one of those decks that's quite predictable in what it does. We've seen it for a while, and it's not abusing anything particularly new or spicy or special. And last but not least, in C-tier, we have Cerebro 2s. This is also a fairly common deck on the ladder. I've played against this a fair amount. And it's a deck that can absolutely put out a lot of points, dish out that big point potential with Brood, with Cerebro Mystique on that. You're buffing your whole board essentially by 4 points, with Blue Marvel by 5 points, so there's some great potential with this deck. I think, again, you're going to struggle against certain things like the Tool, the Tool Shuris of the world are going to really hurt you. The ZABU, DARKHAWK stuff's going to be annoying. Like, this deck can really get a lot of strength in 3 rows, but getting a lot of strength in 2, against a good opponent, I think they can exploit Cerebro or just pass it against you, retreat. So I don't think it's the best deck ever. C tier, I think is an acceptable place to put it. Alright, now we have the D tier. So these are decks that are quite common in the meta, but I don't think they're that great currently. Here we have Electro Ramp. Some of you might think Electro Ramp's pretty good. I don't think it's very decent, to be honest. I think it's a very exploitable deck. Although if you're running Ebony Maw, Dr. Doom, Odin, that can, you know, be quite a powerful thing. You know, you just play your Dr. Doom, your Odin on curve after Electro, after Wave, whatever it might be. And, you know, with that Ebony Maw location, it's often very hard for the opponent to overcome that. So there's definitely potential with this deck. I just feel like against decent opponents, they're going to see your plays coming from a mile away. And with that Electro negative effect, meaning you can only play one card a turn, it just makes your plays very predictable, very counterable. Things like a Cosmo, potentially a Shang-Chi if you play those tool units out, and just potentially the opponent having a better, more powerful combo like a Shuri, a Mr. Negative stuff, whatever it might be. So yeah, I'm not a fan of Electro in this meta. I think it's just a bit crap, really, quite exploitable, but you'll be able to win games again with this, I'm sure. And it's not by any means a terrible deck. But it is, I think, worthy of the D tier. And the final deck that I have in the meta snapshot here is a HELA M.O.D.O.K deck. This is actually something that I have played against quite a few times while climbing, so I think it's fairly popular. People are trying to do the M.O.D.O.K onto HELA. It just doesn't really work. The problem is, right, if you have HELA in hand, you literally, like, the only way to do this is to have Invisible Woman on the board and not get countered. So you Invisible Woman into M.O.D.O.K, into HELA, that will work. Alternatively, you're going to have to just hope your HELA is not in hand and do the M.O.D.O.K. Or you're just playing some kind of scuffed value M.O.D.O.K version where you just, I don't know, play Morbius, Dracula, go M.O.D.O.K, play out a, you know, Apocalypse or whatever it might be. It's just a bit rubbish compared to the other version of M.O.D.O.K, I think. So that's why I put it in D tier. But it is something that I see quite a bit of at the moment. If you've got your Cosmo ready, or your Enchantress, or your Aero, then you can completely shut this deck down, I think. So yeah, not really something that's too powerful. So guys, that was my meta snapshot. Let me know what you think about it, whether you disagree or agree with any of the inclusions. I'm aware some of the card choices might not be perfectly correct. Don't come after me, Jeff Hoogland, please. I'm doing my best out here. This is just from my experience playing on the ladder, getting up to Infinite this season. So we'll see, the meta might evolve and adapt and change. This might become outdated, as always with these kind of videos, but I hope it was entertaining and interesting and useful. Maybe check out a video on screen right now, subscribe as always, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.